China's new Silk Road has been touted as one of the most ambitious infrastructure projects ever conceived. One that will dramatically change the landscape of global trade.
Suspicions abound that China does not care about development, but about increasing its global influence.
China peddles corrupt infrastructure deals in exchange for political influence.
It's the bigger strategic benefits. As China's dollars continue to flow, as China's concrete continues to pour, China's influence continues to increase.
You know, back in January 2017 at the African Union headquartered in Ethiopia, an IT engineer made a very peculiar observation while he was inspecting the servers of the building. The engineer noticed an unusual pattern during the late hours of the night. Guess what happened? He found a connection to servers in Shanghai that were sending emails and audio files, phone calls to Shanghai servers. Ironically, the construction of the African Union headquarters that took place in 2012 had not been actually financed by any African nation.
The impressive new headquarters of the African Union, entirely funded by the Chinese government.
This structure served as a very generous $200 million donation from the Chinese government. It was entirely planned and constructed by Chinese firms as well, using funds from China. Curiously enough, though, the servers were also set up by Chinese engineers who intentionally left a back door for easy accessibility to the African Union servers. After a while, the African Union IT team had discovered the situation. They moved forward and, to remove the Chinese servers, opting to install new ones instead. But the Chinese government did have the audacity to offer assistance to install the new ones. Obviously, the African Union IT team had to decline that offer. Upon further inspection, the Union IT personnel actually found hidden, discreetly embedded microphones in the furniture and the walls of the building. Consequently, the entire edifice was actually under surveillance, transmitting audio recordings and emails to China for a period of like 5 years since the building was erected. This incident exemplifies China's actions in Africa. By constructing key infrastructures like roads, trains, dams, mines, and seaports, China has rapidly expanded its influence in the region. These Chinese ventures are integral to Chinese ambitions as a global superpower, showcasing the country's projection of power across the African continent. You've reached the Financial Almanac on Basel.
There are questions here over why the headquarters of such an important African organization is entirely the work of Chinese construction, labor, and money.
All right, sure. There is a recurring pattern that emerges when a country experiences a rise in power and wealth. As a nation becomes more economically prosperous, it does tend to expand its interests beyond its borders, both economically and military terms. Half a century ago, China was a significantly impoverished nation with a massive population. Over time, they decided to engage with the global community, and by utilizing their vast population as a source of affordable labor. By opening up their economy, China witnessed an extraordinary economic boom.
China is agrarian, urbanizing fast, you betcha, but still agrarian.
Most in terms of land, not population.
Come on, Michael.
No, you're wrong about this.
As China has transformed into a highly affluent nation, it has followed a common trend observed in prosperous countries. It has an outward-looking approach to sustain its growth and assert its power on the global stage. China seeks to connect with other countries strategically. This objective stems from various factors, with the primary one being economic. Similar to how the United States once sought China for cheap labor, during its own period of prosperity. China's economic sense led to increased labor costs and wages, so consequently China had a need to find an alternative source of inexpensive labor and a fresh opportunity for growth. As a result, China made substantial investments amounting to an impressive $300 billion in African nations. The economic rationale is just one aspect of the story. In China, the realms of economics and government powers are intertwined. To comprehend China's true intentions, one must consider its geopolitical motives. To delve into this aspect, it becomes imperative to examine the geographical context as it plays a pivotal role in understanding China's broader intentions and actions. Every single country on the African continent, well, with the exception of Swaziland, finds itself involved in projects backed by China. These projects encompass a wide range of sectors, from transportation such as roads and trains, to energy initiatives involving oil and dams, as well as real estate ventures like housing developments, and also mining activities for other metals, including copper extraction. The scope is vast, varying from a shoe factory in Ethiopia to a substantial $6 billion Chinese financed dam in Nigeria, and even a construction of the longest suspension bridge in Africa located in Mozambique. These Chinese investments have permeated various regions, with significant contributions to even a tiny island situated off the coast of West Africa. On this island, for example, China has injected millions of dollars into construction of housing, a stadium, an auditorium, a library, a national parliament, a truly extensive endeavor. The sheer number of projects is too vast to be easily quantified, and when viewed collectively, many of them have notably benefited the economies of the recipient countries, acting as a substantial economic stimulant. The underlying reasons for China's extensive involvement in these initiatives remain a topic of inquiry. Beyond the evident economic value of investing in emerging markets, China's president claims that their actions are actually motivated by principles of cooperation and friendship. So let's delve into these projects to understand how they're executed and whether or not they align with this African way, whatever that means. One noteworthy example is the remarkable railway system built by China in Kenya. This railway connects Nairobi to Mombasa, and it completes this journey in under 4 hours, surpassing the speed of any train in North America. The Kenyan rail project amounted to a staggering $3.6 billion, making it the most expensive infrastructure undertaking since Kenya basically got its independence due to the strength of the Mau Mau defensive against Occidentals. The majority of the funding came from a substantial loan provided by a Chinese state-run bank. Chinese engineers were also responsible for its design, while Chinese construction firms employed, local Kenyan labor under Chinese management were tasked with its implementation. Currently, the operation of the rail system is still overseen by Chinese companies. A noticeable aspect is the use of Mandarin for safety announcements and documentations, leaving no ambiguity about China's involved in financing and constructing of the railway. This substantial project has resulted in Kenya accumulating billions of dollars of debt owed to China. 72% of Kenya's total debt is now owed to the Chinese. Despite the project's intentions to alleviate congestions on the parallel highway, it has completely missed this objective, right? As the railways also disrupts 2 national parks along its route. It pierces right through them. I was there.
While the train will offer passengers a view of a lifetime while passing through the national park, conservationists are concerned that this construction will affect the ecosystem and the wildlife that live here.
Some of these projects have not lived up to their promises and did not align with resolving African issues in a manner authentic to the African way. Take, for example, the impressive railway in Kenya, right? It failed to deliver on its intended objectives. Despite having this shiny infrastructure, it did not effectively address local needs. During the construction of the railway, Chinese workers were reported to have treated local laborers poorly, segregated them during meal breaks, and resorting to punishments for missing deadlines or for not disposing garbage promptly. In addition, certain Chinese workers were also involved in corrupt practices, accepting bribes as a part of a larger corruption scheme related to the railway project. This raises concern that the project was not even genuinely concerned with supporting the local environment and left Kenya burdened with substantial debt and a fancy new railway. The situation is not universally negative, as there are some instances where some projects genuinely benefited the local populace. A prime example is the beautiful, well-constructed roads in Lesotho. which has significantly improved transportations within the country and positively impacted the local population. On a broader scale, China's motivation for engaging in such projects are multifaceted, right? A desire to offer loans and investments to countries like Nigeria, with its vast young population and potential for rapid economic growth, is a part of the business rationale. China's flexibility in bypassing environmental standards during these ventures is very appealing as well to them. There's more to these projects than actually meets the eye. Beneath the surface, for example, of mere investment projects, there may be geopolitical and strategic considerations at play. The situation is a complex mix of intentions and outcomes, and many of these African nations are very much interested, whether they qualify or not. That's another question, but they are very much interested in joining the BRICS bloc alliance one day and perhaps trading amongst one another with their own fiat and resources and moving away from the dollar, the franc, and the euro, right? So these would also have to be kept in mind. You'll come across numerous free gifts from China, right? And the political ones in particular are very intriguing. For instance, China has undertaken projects such as constructing a new parliament building for 7 African countries and offering $32 million to build a headquarters for ECOWAS, the Economic Union for West Africa, at no cost. Better get that bug detector in your walls and furniture and make sure your servers don't report to Shanghai. All right. It's crucial to emphasize that there are no truly free gifts, right, in international relations. Everything comes with strings attached. China's investments in Africa is in part a strategic move to secure its position as a global superpower and also to foster alliances. China, therefore, has leveraged its financial resources to create ties with virtually every African country, well, except for Swaziland, which has resisted such effort. Through generous funding, China has successfully persuaded these countries to break ties with Taiwan and support mainland China. This plays a significant role on the ongoing diplomatic tussle between China and Taiwan, as both claim to represent a legitimate China. China has skillfully utilized its financial influence to garner support and friendship from numerous African nations, reinforcing its position on the global stage. Do you remember when China constructed the African Union headquarters and secretly bugged the entire building to spy on their leaders and their emails and their conversations? It serves as a telling example and a reminder of the hidden conditions attached to such projects. The most subtle and perilous strings are actually the debts that are incurred. As John Adams aptly put it, there are 2 ways to conquer and enslave a country. One is by the sword, and then the other is by debt, right? While a forceful statement, it holds significant relevance here. Numerous projects have been financed by Chinese loans, right, in Africa, leaving African nations mired in debt. When a country owns substantial amounts to another, the debtor becomes susceptible to the lender's influence, particularly if they reach a point where the repayment becomes very unfeasible. And this is not just mere conjecture, folks. An instance from Sri Lanka will illustrate this point. China assisted Sri Lanka in building a port on its southern eastern coast through a Chinese loan, right? However, as time passed on, Sri Lanka struggled to repay the debt. So consequently, in 2017, China offered a solution. To ease the debt burden, Sri Lanka could just lease the port for 99 years to China.
The South Asian country is suffering severe shortages of essential goods, high inflation, and crippling power blackouts.
The country took loans worth $45 billion from various countries, including more than $8 billion from China.
All 26 ministers of the cabinet quit altogether just late last night.
High inflation, shortage of basic essentials, and riots are spreading rapidly across the entire country.
This put Sri Lanka in a very difficult position, as it involved granting China access to a part of its sovereign territory, potentially for military purposes, mind you. Yet, given the magnitude of the debt, Sri Lanka reluctantly had to agree to the deal. This scenario establishes a very worrisome precedent that could be applicable to several African nations entangled in significant debt with China. It raises concerns that these countries might find themselves in a very precarious situation, unable to repay the debt and potentially having to make compromises that could actually compromise their sovereignty and national interests. As China continues its rapid growth, it exhibits behavior very typical of any ascending superpower, right? If I were to create a video telling you guys how US projected its power throughout history, it'd be very far from perfect, obviously, right? Suggesting that China's actions are, in a sense, very normal for a nation in its position. However, this does not justify or excuse any bad behavior, right? It just merely highlights the pattern that we see in emerging superpowers. China has shown particular interest in Africa, leading to numerous very impressive infrastructure projects. While these endeavors are visually striking, right, they do raise questions about the underlying motives behind them. It appears that the motivations extend beyond purely business and economic interests, raising concerns about China's strategic objectives on the continent. The most pressing issue to monitor going forward is the impact of the extensive debt accumulated by the African nations due to the contracts with China, right? The looming question is how these countries burdened with such substantial debt will be able to service and repay it in the future. The repercussions of the potential inability to meet these financial obligations do raise some concerns about the long-term consequences for both China and the African nations involved.
How concerned is the administration about China's influence in Africa, and what can the U.S. do to counter this?
So we've always been very clear that we've certainly have had concerns, but we've been very clear that our movement, how we move forward with China, is through competition, not conflict. We're certainly not going to comment on...
I want to thank you again for your continued support. Let me know your thoughts down below so I can give you a like. And thank you again for watching the Financial Almanac and your continued support into this next video.